Fake HOA cops bullied an old man. They destroyed his wife's memorial garden. This rose garden belongs to Harold Jenkins, a 78-year-old widower who's poured his heart into it for 20 years to honor his late wife, Rose. But a group of fake HOA cops showed up, called it a violation, and tried to destroy it, bullying an old man who was just keeping her memory alive. They didn't know Harold's grandson is an investigative reporter, and he wasn't about to let them get away with it. This is HOA Karen Files, where we expose the bullies who prey on the vulnerable. Have you ever dealt with a fake HOA trying to ruin something precious? Share your story in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell for more. Let's get into how Harold and his grandson fought back. Harold Jenkins, 78, lived in a modest house on the edge of a quiet suburban neighborhood in Tennessee. The house wasn't much to look at: faded paint, a sagging porch, a roof that needed new shingles. But the front yard was a masterpiece. A sprawling rose garden, with blooms in every shade of red, pink, and white, stretched across the lawn, meticulously tended with trellises, stone paths, and a small bench where Harold would sit every evening. The garden wasn't just a hobby. It was a memorial to his wife, Rose, who'd passed away 20 years ago from cancer. She'd loved roses, and Harold had promised her on her deathbed that he'd keep her memory alive through the flowers. For 2 decades, he'd kept that promise, even as arthritis made it harder to kneel and prune. One sunny September morning, Harold was in the garden, trimming dead blooms with a pair of old shears, when a white van pulled up to his curb. 3 people stepped out, 2 men and a woman, all wearing black vests with HOA compliance in bold white letters. The woman, who introduced herself as Cheryl Baxter, carried a clipboard and a camera, snapping photos of the garden without asking. "Mr. Jenkins," she said, her tone sharp, "this garden is in violation of Maple Grove HOA regulations. It's an unapproved structure, and the colors are non-compliant with our aesthetic standards. You've got 48 hours to remove it, or we'll do it for you, and you'll owe a $2,000 fine for non-compliance." Harold blinked, leaning on his cane for support. "Maple Grove HOA? I've lived here 50 years. There's no HOA in this area. This is my property, and this garden is for my wife. You've got no right to tell me what to do." Cheryl smirked, handing him a letter stamped with a fake logo. "Maple Grove HOA was established last year to oversee this neighborhood," she said. "You're under our jurisdiction now. Pay the fine, or lose the garden." One of the men, a burly guy named Mike, stepped forward, his voice low and threatening. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be, old man. We've dealt with stubborn types like you before." Harold's hands shook as he took the letter, but he stood his ground. "This garden is all I have left of my Rose," he said, his voice cracking. "You're not touching it." Cheryl laughed, a cold, mocking sound. "Sentimental old fool," she muttered, loud enough for Harold to hear. Mike took a step into the garden, deliberately stomping on a cluster of pink roses, crushing the petals under his boot. "Oops," he said, grinning. Harold's heart sank as he watched the flowers, Rose's favorites, get trampled. He wanted to fight back, but his body wasn't what it used to be. "Get off my property," he said, his voice trembling with anger. The group laughed, got back in their van, and drove off, leaving Harold standing in his ruined garden, tears in his eyes. That evening, Harold called his grandson, Ryan Carter, a 32-year-old investigative reporter for the Tennessee Tribune. Ryan lived in Nashville, an hour away, but he'd always been close to his grandfather, spending summers at the house as a kid, helping Harold plant roses and listening to stories about Rose. When Harold told him what happened, his voice breaking as he described the crushed flowers, Ryan's blood boiled. "They said they're from an HOA, but I've never heard of Maple Grove," Harold said. "They're coming back in 2 days to tear it down, Ryan. I don't know what to do." Ryan clenched his jaw. "Don't worry, Grandpa," he said. "I'm coming over first thing tomorrow. We're not letting them touch that garden." Ryan arrived the next morning, his reporter's instincts already in overdrive. He hugged Harold, then walked through the garden, his heart aching at the sight of the trampled roses. "This is low, even for scammers," he muttered. He took photos of the damage, then sat down with Harold to look at the letter. It looked official, stamped with a logo, filled with legal jargon, but Ryan had seen enough scams in his career to spot the red flags. The letterhead listed a P.O. box instead of a physical address, and the bylaws it referenced were vague and nonsensical. "This is fake," Ryan said, his voice firm. "There's no Maple Grove HOA. They're trying to bully you into paying, or worse, scare you into leaving so they can take the land." Harold's eyes widened. "Take the land? But this is all I have. Rose's garden, our memories. Why would they do this?" Ryan's mind raced. He'd heard of scams like this before. Fake HOAs targeting elderly homeowners, especially those living alone, to extort money or force them out of valuable property. Harold's house might not look like much, but the land was prime real estate, close to a growing suburban area where developers were snapping up lots for new subdivisions. "They picked the wrong guy to mess with," Ryan said, a determined glint in his eye. "I'm going to find out who these people are and make sure they pay for what they did to you." Ryan wasted no time. He set up a makeshift office in Harold's living room, his laptop open, a notebook filled with scribbled leads. First, he called the county clerk's office to confirm what he already suspected. There was no Maple Grove HOA registered in the area. The clerk, a woman named Diane, was horrified when Ryan explained the situation. "We've had reports of fake HOAs popping up lately," she said. "They target seniors, especially ones who live alone. I'll send you the records for Harold's property. It's clean, no HOA, no liens." Ryan thanked her, his suspicions confirmed. These HOA cops were scammers, and Harold was their latest victim. Next, Ryan turned to the letter. The P.O. box was in a nearby town, and the logo, a generic tree with Maple Grove HOA in block letters, looked like it had been slapped together in a cheap design program. He ran a reverse image search on the logo and found it on a shady website offering HOA compliance services for hire. The site was registered to a company called Pinnacle Property Solutions, but the address listed was a vacant lot in Chattanooga. "Shell Company," Ryan muttered, jotting down the name. He dug deeper, searching public records for any connection between Pinnacle and the names Cheryl Baxter or Mike, but came up empty. These people were good at covering their tracks, but Ryan was better. While Ryan worked, Harold sat on the porch, staring at the garden. He couldn't bring himself to fix the crushed roses, not yet. Every broken petal felt like a wound, a reminder of how helpless he'd felt watching those bullies trample his wife's memory. He thought about Rose, her laugh, the way she'd hum while tending the flowers, the way she'd looked at him in her final days, her hand weak in his. "I'm sorry, Rose," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I should have protected it better." But Ryan's determination gave him hope. If anyone could stop these people, it was his grandson. Ryan decided to set a trap. He knew the fake HOA cops would be back in 24 hours to enforce their ultimatum, so he installed a small security camera on Harold's porch, hidden behind a potted plant. He also called a friend at the local police department, Officer Daniels, to give him a heads up. "I don't want to spook them yet," Ryan said. "I need them to show up so I can get them on camera, then we can nail them." Daniels agreed to have a patrol car nearby, just in case things got out of hand. The next morning, right on schedule, the white van pulled up. Cheryl, Mike, and the third man, whose name tag read Tom, stepped out, this time carrying tools, a shovel, a pair of hedge trimmers, and a can of weed killer. Cheryl knocked on the door, her voice loud and demanding. "Mr. Jenkins, your 48 hours are up. Open the door, or we're coming in to remove this eyesore." Harold, following Ryan's instructions, stayed inside, watching through the window. Ryan, hidden in the kitchen with his phone ready to record, whispered, "Let them make the first move, Grandpa. We need proof." Cheryl didn't wait for an answer. She nodded to Mike, who grabbed the shovel and started digging up a rose bush near the edge of the garden. Tom sprayed weed killer on a row of white roses, the chemical stench filling the air. "This'll teach the old geezer," Mike said, laughing as he yanked the bush out of the ground, roots and all. Harold's hands clenched into fists, his heart pounding with rage, but Ryan put a hand on his shoulder. "We've got them," he said, his voice low. The security camera captured everything, the destruction, the laughter, the casual cruelty. Ryan stepped outside, his phone still recording. "Hey," he shouted, his voice sharp. "What the hell do you think you're doing? This is private property. You're trespassing." Cheryl turned, her smirk fading when she saw the phone. "Who are you?" she demanded. "I'm Harold's grandson," Ryan said, "and I know you're not a real HOA. I've got the county records to prove it. You're on camera destroying a memorial garden. Smile for the lens." Mike dropped the shovel, his face paling, but Cheryl tried to bluff her way out. "We're within our rights," she said, her voice shaky. "Maple Grove HOA," Ryan cut her off. "There is no Maple Grove HOA. You're scammers, and I'm taking this to the police and the press." The group hesitated, then bolted for the van, peeling out in a cloud of dust. Ryan turned to Harold, who'd come out onto the porch, tears streaming down his face as he looked at the damaged garden. "I'm sorry, Grandpa," Ryan said, his voice soft. "But we've got them now. They're not getting away with this." Harold nodded, his voice barely a whisper. "For Rose," he said. "Do it for Rose." With the footage in hand, Ryan went to work. He uploaded the video to his laptop, making copies to ensure it was safe, then sent it to Officer Daniels. "This is vandalism and extortion," Daniels said, watching the clip with a grim expression. "We'll start an investigation, but we need more to tie them to a larger operation." Ryan nodded. He knew this wasn't just about Cheryl, Mike, and Tom. This was bigger. These fake HOA cops were too organized, too confident. They'd done this before, and they'd likely do it again unless he stopped them. Ryan's next step was to dig into Pinnacle Property Solutions, the company behind the fake website. He used his press credentials to access business records, tracing the company's registration to a man named Victor Grayson, a 50-year-old with a history of fraud convictions. Victor had been linked to several scams over the years: fake timeshares, bogus real estate deals, even a pyramid scheme that had landed him in jail for 2 years. Pinnacle was his latest venture, a front for targeting vulnerable homeowners, especially seniors like Harold, who might not know how to fight back. Ryan found a pattern in the public records. Over the past year, Pinnacle had sent similar HOA violation letters to at least a dozen other homeowners in rural Tennessee, all elderly, all living on valuable land. Some had paid the fines, fearing eviction. Others had sold their properties at a loss to escape the harassment. One woman, an 82-year-old widow named Margaret, had suffered a stress-induced heart attack after Pinnacle's enforcement team showed up at her door. "They told me I'd lose my home if I didn't pay $3,000, she told Ryan over the phone, her voice trembling. "I didn't have the money, so I sold the house my husband built. I had nowhere else to go." The more Ryan dug, the angrier he got. This wasn't just a scam. It was a predatory operation, preying on the elderly and exploiting their fear. He tracked down a former Pinnacle employee, a young man named Jake who'd quit after 6 months. Jake agreed to meet Ryan at a diner in Chattanooga, his eyes darting nervously as he spoke. "Victor runs the show," Jake said, his voice low. "He hires people like Cheryl to pose as HOA cops, gives them vests, fake letters, the works. They target old folks because they're less likely to fight back. If someone pays, great. If they don't, Victor pressures them to sell. Then he flips the land to developers for a profit." Ryan recorded the conversation, his jaw tight. "Why'd you quit?" he asked. Jake looked down at his coffee. "I couldn't sleep at night," he said. "We went after this old guy once, Vietnam vet, lived alone. We tore up his yard, scared him half to death. He paid us $1,500 just to leave him alone. I felt like a monster." Jake handed Ryan a USB drive with internal Pinnacle documents, email chains, fake HOA templates, even a list of targets with Harold's name on it. "Use this," Jake said. "Shut them down." Back at Harold's house, Ryan showed his grandfather the evidence. Harold sat quietly, his hands folded in his lap, as Ryan explained the scope of the scam. "They've been doing this to people like me all over the state," Harold said, his voice heavy. "How many gardens did they destroy? How many memories?" Ryan put a hand on his shoulder. "We're going to stop them, Grandpa," he said. "I'm writing the story, and I'm going to make sure everyone knows what they did to you and to Rose." Ryan spent the next 2 days writing, pouring everything into the article: the fake HOA cops, the bullying, the destruction of the garden, the larger scam. He included Jake's testimony, the Pinnacle documents, and interviews with other victims. He titled the piece, "Fake HOA Cops Terrorize Elderly Homeowners. One Man Fights Back for His Wife's Memory," and pitched it to his editor at the Tennessee Tribune. "This is explosive," his editor said. "We're running it on the front page, and I'm sending it to our national partners. This could go viral." As Ryan prepared to publish, he helped Harold start repairing the garden. They replanted the damaged roses, working side by side in the late afternoon sun. Harold's hands shook as he packed soil around a new bush, but his eyes were brighter than they'd been in days. "Rose would be proud of you," he said, his voice soft. "She always said you'd do big things." Ryan smiled, his heart full. "This is for both of you," he said. "Let's make sure no one else has to go through this." The article hit the Tennessee Tribune's front page on a Monday morning, and within hours, it was everywhere. National outlets picked it up: The Washington Post, CNN, even NBC Nightly News. The headline, "Fake HOA Cops Destroy Elderly Man's Memorial Garden and Scam Scheme," struck a chord, and the story went viral, racking up millions of views and shares. Social media exploded with hashtags like #JusticeForHarold and #StopFakeHOAs, as people shared their own stories of HOA scams and expressed outrage over what had happened to Harold. The security camera footage Ryan had captured became the centerpiece of the story, played on loop across news channels. Viewers watched in horror as Cheryl, Mike, and Tom laughed while destroying the garden, their cruelty laid bare. Public reaction was swift and fierce. "This is disgusting," one Twitter user wrote. "How do you sleep at night bullying an old man over a garden for his dead wife?" Another posted, "Those roses were his heart. Shame on these scammers." A GoFundMe page started by a local activist to help Harold rebuild the garden raised $50,000 in 48 hours, with donations pouring in from across the country. The pressure was too much for Pinnacle Property Solutions to withstand. Victor Grayson, the mastermind behind the scam, tried to go underground, shutting down the company's website and abandoning the P.O. box. But Ryan's article had already given the police enough to act. Using the Pinnacle documents and Jake's testimony, they tracked down Victor to a cheap motel in Knoxville, where he was arrested on charges of fraud, extortion, and vandalism. Cheryl, Mike, and Tom were picked up the next day, caught trying to flee the state in the white van. The arrests made national news, with footage of Victor in handcuffs playing alongside the garden video, a stark contrast that fueled public outrage. Back in Harold's neighborhood, the community rallied around him. Neighbors who'd barely spoken to him in years showed up with gardening tools, helping to replant the roses and build a new trellis. A local nursery donated dozens of rose bushes, and a landscaper offered to install a small fountain in Rose's honor, free of charge. Harold was overwhelmed, tears in his eyes as he watched the garden come back to life. "I never thought I'd see this," he said, his voice trembling. "Rose would have loved it." Ryan stood beside him, his arm around his grandfather's shoulders. "She's smiling down on us, Grandpa," he said. "I know she is." The legal fallout was swift. Victor and his crew faced multiple lawsuits from their victims, including Harold, who joined a class action suit with Margaret and the other homeowners. The Tennessee Tribune article had exposed Pinnacle's entire operation, leading to investigations in 3 other states where similar scams had been reported. Lawmakers began drafting legislation to crack down on fake HOAs, with one bill dubbed Rose's Law, in honor of Harold's wife. No one should lose their home or their memories to scammers, a state senator said at a press conference, holding up a photo of Harold in his garden. For Harold, the victory was bittersweet. The garden was restored, more beautiful than ever, but the pain of that day lingered. He kept a small photo of Rose on the bench, her smiling face a reminder of why he'd fought so hard. "I did it for you, darling," he whispered one evening, the sun setting over the roses. Ryan, who'd taken a week off to stay with his grandfather, watched from the porch, his heart full. He'd exposed a scam, brought down a criminal operation, and given his grandfather a reason to smile again. But he knew the fight wasn't over. There were more Victors out there, more Harolds to protect. In the months that followed, Harold's garden became a symbol of resilience and community. The GoFundMe money allowed him to expand the garden, adding a stone pathway with a plaque that read, "Rose's Garden, in loving memory." The fountain, a gift from the landscaper, bubbled softly in the center, surrounded by white roses, Rose's favorite. Harold spent his days tending the flowers, his arthritis less of a burden now that he had a renewed purpose. Neighbors stopped by often, bringing their grandchildren to see the garden, sharing stories over cups of tea on the porch. "You've brought us together," one neighbor, a 60-year-old named Ellen, told him. "We were strangers before this." Ryan's article won him a journalism award, the Tennessee Press Association's top honor for investigative reporting. He accepted the award in Nashville, dedicating it to Harold and Rose. "This story isn't just about a scam," he said in his speech, his voice steady. "It's about the people we love, the memories we hold dear, and the fight to protect them. My grandfather taught me that." The audience gave him a standing ovation, and Harold, watching the live stream from home, wiped a tear from his eye. "That's my boy," he said, his voice proud. The legal battle against Pinnacle Property Solutions continued, but the outcome was clear. Victor Grayson was sentenced to 10 years in prison, with Cheryl, Mike, and Tom each facing 5 years for their roles in the scam. The class action suit resulted in a $2 million settlement, split among the victims. Harold used his share to set up a small foundation in Rose's name, offering grants to community gardens across Tennessee. "I want other people to have a place to remember their loved ones," he said at the foundation's launch, his voice soft but firm. That's what Rose would have wanted. The broader impact of the story was undeniable. Rose's law passed in Tennessee with bipartisan support, making it a felony to impersonate an HOA and imposing strict penalties for targeting vulnerable populations. Other states followed suit, with similar laws proposed in Georgia, Florida, and Ohio. Advocacy groups for seniors used Harold's story to raise awareness about scams, distributing flyers with tips on how to spot fake HOAs and protect property rights. Harold Jenkins showed us what's at stake, one advocate said at a rally. "We're fighting for every rose garden out there." For Harold, the greatest reward was the garden itself. On the 1-year anniversary of the incident, he held a small ceremony, inviting the neighbors, Ryan, and even Officer Daniels, who'd become a friend. They planted a new rose bush together, a vibrant red one Harold had named Rose's Legacy. As the sun set, casting a golden glow over the garden, Harold sat on the bench, the photo of Rose in his hand. "We did it, darling," he whispered. "We kept your memory alive." Ryan sat beside him, his heart full. "You're a hero, Grandpa," he said. "To me, to Rose, to everyone." The community had changed, too. The neighbors who'd once kept to themselves now looked out for each other, forming a tight-knit group that met monthly to discuss ways to support seniors in the area. They started a neighborhood watch, not the kind with vests and tasers, but a real one, where people checked on each other, shared meals, and made sure no one felt alone. Harold's garden became a gathering place, a reminder of what they'd almost lost and what they'd gained by coming together. Harold Jenkins turned a garden of memories into a symbol of hope, taking down a group of fake HOA cops who thought they could bully an old man into submission. They didn't know he had a grandson who'd fight for him, and a community that'd stand by him. Now, Rose's legacy lives on, not just in these flowers, but in laws and lives changed across the country. This is HOA Karen Files, where we shine a light on the scams that hurt the vulnerable. Have you or someone you know been targeted by a fake HOA? Tell me in the comments. I read every one. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you don't miss the next story. We'll see you soon, and let's keep fighting for what matters.